Hello, I'm back here reading from The Eye of the Eye, from which nothing is hidden, by Dr. David R. Hawkins. We're on chapter 8 now, which is still part of section 3, titled The Pathway of Consciousness. And apologies if my voice goes a bit. I've got a little bit of an allergy to an ivy bush, an amazing ivy bush that's full of wildlife and bugs, but it gives me a bit of a funny chest. Anyway, so excuse me if it does interfere with my voice and my reading. Hopefully be fine. So chapter 8, Beyond Causality. Get yourself comfortable and I shall begin. By watching the phenomenon of the mind in its operation, its mechanisms become apparent and then tend to dissolve. The presumptions of the mind are its separateness, its belief in a progression of time, with its beginnings and endings, and the categories of thought that constitute and ensure its survival. To survive, the ego has to believe it is real, and that it has a separate, independent existence. The other motive for its continuance is the belief that through the ego and its betterment, happiness can be found at last, and the perfect conditions for it are secured. Therefore, the ego mind constantly seeks control and gain in all its various forms and appearances. It seeks successes by whatever yardstick it measures that illusory goal. Happiness is always around the next corner, so it strains harder to achieve its goals. At some point, the illusion breaks down and the opening for the start of the spiritual quest commences. The quest turns from without to within, and the search for answers begins. With good fortune, one comes upon the teachings of true enlightenment and does not deviate from the core of those teachings. Over time, many of the explanations and understandings that were presented along with the original teachings have been lost and have slid instead into misunderstandings. Over the centuries, some of the greatest teachings have been distorted to arrive, amazingly, at their exact opposite meaning. These then become the basis of strife and the obstruction of truth. It is not only useful but also critical to have some authoritative source available to recheck one's bearings and what directions to follow. It cannot be said often enough that the calibrated level of truth of any teacher or teaching should be obtained and confirmed before becoming a student or follower, much less a devotee or initiate. One's commitment should be to God and truth only. Teachers are to be respected, but devotion should be restricted to only the truth. As Buddha said, put no head above your own, meaning that one's only true guru is the self, the Buddha nature. The self of the teacher and one's own self are one and the same. The teacher becomes a source of inspiration and information. It is the inspiration that supports the quest. Does spiritual commitment mean one has to give up the world? No, of course not. It means merely that worldly life needs to be recontextualized, restructured, and envisioned differently. It is not the world that is a trap, but one's attachment to it, along with one's observations that cloud the search for truth. Some attractions themselves are merely time wasters, while others are serious traps with grim consequences in which the unaware become immersed. On the other hand, it is sometimes only as the result of the sheer agony of one's having gone astray that hitting bottom, letting go and accepting better choices occurs. Therefore, one can never say it is wrong for anyone to follow any particular pathway, for it may be the very means of their ultimate salvation, as painful as it may be. We can say with certainty that anything that fails to make one go strong with the muscle test method is not a direction that a committed spiritual seeker of enlightenment wants to follow. One source of error is often the seemingly innocuous inhuman capacity for curiosity. The lure at the door to disaster is not obviously something negative, but a more sophisticated bait that conceals the wolf in sheep's clothing. It is therefore necessary to avoid that which does not make one go strong with the muscle test, because that which makes one go strong supports life and leads to truth. Can one explore the domains that lead away from truth and return unscathed? The answer, at least for the present, is that it is unlikely. Let us look at the fact that 78% of the world's population tests as being below the level of integrity at 200. There is also the social reaction to be dealt with, which might be called the crab phenomenon. In a pail of crabs, as one or more try to get over the edge to freedom, the other crab reach up and pull it or them back in. In some people, there is a contrary reaction towards those who are seeking the light. Indeed, if a member of a negatively calibrated cult begins to discern the negativity that is present behind the facade of holiness and tries to leave, they are often denounced and subjected to abuse or even violence. Most traditional pathways therefore recommend that one congregate with others who have a similar spiritual dedication. It is also significant that the consciousness level of mankind, which stood at 190 for many centuries, has now recently jumped to 207. Therefore, the sea of consciousness of mankind as a whole now supports the positive instead of the negative. The spiritual direction. It is helpful to remember that neither truth nor enlightenment is something to be found, sought, acquired, gained, or possessed. That which is the infinite presence is always present, and its realization occurs of itself when the obstacles to that realization are removed. It is therefore not necessary to study the truth, but only to let go of that which is fallacious. Moving away the clouds does not cause the sun to shine, but merely reveals that which was hidden all along. Spiritual work, therefore, is primarily a letting go of the presumably known for the unknown, with the promise of others who have done it that the effort is more than well rewarded at the end. On the earthly level, gold is not created but merely revealed by chipping away that which obscures it. One of the main spiritual tools is intention, which sets up priorities and hierarchies of values that energize one's efforts. Spiritual work is a commitment and also an exploration. The way has been opened by those who have gone before and set the possibility in consciousness for others to follow. Just as Roger Bannister broke through the M field of the 4-minute mile, so have beings of advanced consciousness left markers for others to follow. In turn, every advance that we make in our awareness benefits unseen multitudes and strengthens the next step for others to follow. Every act of kindness is noticed by the universe and is preserved forever. When seen for what it is, gratitude replaces spiritual ambition. In traditional Buddhism, one seeks enlightenment for the good of all mankind. All gifts return to their source. In due time, one's spiritual intention and focus come to replace worldly ambitions and desires. It is as though one is progressively drawn into the self, as if there were a spiritual gravity acting by attraction. A style of knowingness replaces reason and logic. An intuitive awareness focuses on the essence of life and its activities rather than on goals or the details of form. Perception begins to change, and the beauty of creation literally shines forth from all persons and objects. A simple scene may unexpectedly, suddenly become overwhelmingly beautiful, as though revealing itself in three-dimensional technicolor. There are moments when suddenly all is still, and the experience of the quality of all that is takes place within an all-encompassing presence. It is this eye of the eye that gives the sense of reality to life. That which enables us to experience what we think of as an individual I is actually the infinite I. The radiance of God is the light of awareness that reveals the divinity of all that exists. In the stillness of the infinite presence, the mind is silent as there is nothing that can be said. All speaks for itself with completeness and exactitude. With this realization, one transcends the final duality of existence versus non-existence, because only existence is possible. The opposite of truth does not exist, because reality excludes non-reality. In this realization resides the peace of God. Evolution versus creation. This is a favourite source of contention for politicians, school boards, and courts. In reality, there is no conflict. Evolution and creation are one and the same. Creation is the very source and essence of evolution. Evolution is the process by which creation becomes manifest. The physical world is a world of effects and has no power of causality within it. From paleontology, we can see that species and life forms have changed over millions of years. Likewise, the early versions and forms of mankind that are available for study demonstrate a progression of form. Evolution occurs as a progression within consciousness itself to form through greater adaptability to the environment. This evolution occurs on the plane of consciousness, which includes intelligence and intention, as well as aesthetic awareness. Thus, evolution occurs within the invisible domain of infinite potentiality, and then becomes manifest as the consequence of creation, which is intrinsic to the essence of the universe itself, and is continuous and ongoing. If creation were a solitary act by God at some point in the distant past, then all living things would be exactly as they were millions of years ago. Inasmuch as neither God nor reality has any beginning or end and exists outside of time, no single act of God in time and space is tenable. Continuous creation by an ongoing and ever-present God does fit with what is apparent. Basically, there is no conflict between evolution and creation, as one is merely an expression of the other in the visible domain. Evolution does not negate God, but reflects God's presence as an ever-present in everything that exists. Because of creation, all that exists takes joy from its existence, because of its innate divinity, which is the consciousness of God. Consciousness, the way to God. The intellect. The risk in providing information is that the listener's ego will try to assimilate the information as data by the intellect. and there it stops. There are spiritual students who have attended literally hundreds of workshops and lectures and have rooms full of spiritual books, but have not moved forward in awareness at all. They are at a standstill. Their search goes on to the next workshop and the next book, the guru, and so on. Spiritual work is not of the intellect, which leads to a PhD in comparative religion or theology. True metaphysics is an abstraction to facilitate languaging and verbalization in order to communicate that which, in truth, cannot be communicated in words. The words are not the things to be realized. The truths learned have to be put into daily practice to be effective, and they exist beyond the words. If this is done, change takes place. The purpose of information is for it to be absorbed with familiarity and then mature into understanding. Understanding. In spiritual work, understanding in itself has the capacity to bring about change. It acts as a catalyst and opens new ways of looking at things. It brings about growth and spiritual advancement. As spiritual growth continues, old styles of thinking and contextualizing are surrendered and accompanied by the joy of new discoveries. Anger at the anger at the absurdities of life is now replaced by laughter, and what a lot of the world bemoans and makes much of as melodrama is now seen as comical. Spiritual teachings need to be accepted to become integrated. Resistance comes from the ego, which lacks humility, and that, out of pride, resents being wrong. It is better to realize that one is not giving up wrong views, but instead is adopting better ones. That peace is better than war, and that love is better than hate makes sense to the intellect. But the ego may rebel at giving up its favourite hate and justified resentments. There is a multitude of millions of people on the planet, whole cultures and societies, whose only theme and reason for survival is hate. Their entire society is based around revenge and the duality of victim and perpetrator. Whole areas of the world are devoted to the expressions of hatred, which are constantly justified by reiterating the distant past. In society, there is no dearth of justifications for hatreds. One can always cite long dead ancestors and justify hatred towards their ancient enemies. This can even be seen as heroic, patriotic, laudable, or politically correct. Willingness. Letting go of the old is facilitated by willingness, courage, and faith. Spiritual progress literally benefits all mankind in that it raises the general level of consciousness. Even one iota makes a difference. Another obstacle to spiritual growth is impatience. This can only be overcome by surrender. Meditation. A general orientation and a technique have been described elsewhere. We may think that thoughts are connected together by associations or some other seemingly plausible psychological explanation. By observation, however, one will note that, on the contrary, thoughts are occurring in a senseless, random fashion. They jump from one subject to another, with no real connection to each other at all. The thought stream is usually described from the limits of the Newtonian linear paradigm that imputes causality where none exists in reality. Thoughts appear to be random, non-linear and chaotic, with no calculable predictability. They seem to be haphazard. Despite laudable efforts, there is really no verifiable explanation for thoughts, images, concepts, memories, fantasies, feelings, hopes, or fears. And the content of mind refuses to be controlled. The substratum of mind, the matrix of thinkingness, is the constant production by thinkingness that prompts an endless succession of thoughts. These are purposely interjected to prevent all possibility of silence. The more one attempts to control it, the more it plays tricks, becomes rebellious, refuses to be controlled, and appears to be untamable. In meditation, one can see from the viewpoint of the witness, the observer, that the field of consciousness itself is watching the mind, and that it is futile to struggle with it. It is helpful to realize that the mind is not me. It is an impertinence. It is seductive. It tries to convince you that you are it. The identification with the body is not overcome by destroying the body. Neither is the identification with the mind transcended by destroying the mind. If neither the body nor the mind is the real self, there is no need to destroy it, conquer it, or do battle with it. Thoughts are occurring on their own, not because they are caused by anything or anyone. The nature of the mind is to think. One can force it into sequential logical thought for short spurts by focus and intention. In this way, it can solve problems. The mind is fast and clever. It claims credit for its thoughts, good thoughts, that is. One has to be razor sharp and focused with attention to catch that the claim of authorship of the thoughts happens a split nanosecond after the thought occurs. The illusion of I thought disappears when the mind is caught red-handed. The Buddha said the same thing. Buddha mind is discovered between the thoughts. Thoughts actually don't mean anything and are not necessary for survival. The ego's claim that it authored the thought actually takes place in about 100,000th of a second. In reality, everything is actually happening of its own. One's life is a continuous gift, and its continuity from moment to moment is sustained by God, not by the ego. There is no point trying to block out thoughts, they just return. People fear that if they let go of their mind or thinkingness, or do not carefully watch it or try to control it, they will either die or go insane. The objectives of the ego mind can never be achieved. Its efforts are noisy and upsetting. In actuality, one is much better off without it. Once one observes that it is hopeless, one can begin to abandon it by withdrawing interest from it. One can begin to disown its hypnotic fascination and step back progressively from watcher to observer, to witness, to consciousness itself, and finally to the awareness that illuminates consciousness and enables awareness to be aware. The self can be pictured as a space that is essentially clear of form. The mind is under the constant pressure of anticipation to attempt to control the next split nanosecond of experience. One can focus in on the source of this will, to think and let go at the level of the willfulness that underlies its obsession and drive to control the experience of the next moment. Spiritual work is thus an endless surrendering, letting go, turning away from, withdrawing from, and ignoring that which is irrelevant and essentially unrewarding. The direction of focus then moves from the content of thought to that which is observing and experiencing the thought, and then to the discovery that the awareness is aware as the result of an innate quality and is not really a volitional act by an imaginary, independent self. Awareness transcends location, body, space, time, mind, thought, and feelings. Like the sky, it is the backdrop through which the clouds float. The ultimate witnessing of awareness is undisturbed by any content and does not depend on content for its own existence. To go beyond the known requires courage, faith, and conviction. It also requires spiritual power and energy whose source is innate with the higher fields of consciousness and the great teachers and their teachings. Enlightenment itself is by the grace of God, but it also occurs only by one's own inner agreement and choice. Forgiveness and the innocence of consciousness. Forgiveness is a difficult step for the average mind to take by virtue of its arbitrary positionality that creates a conflicting duality of right and wrong, observing versus undeserving, deserving versus undeserving, fair versus unfair. This is the problem of the opposites. The resolution of the opposites requires some understanding about the nature of consciousness. Compassion for human frailty tempers judgmentalism. The human mind places hypothetical standards on human conduct that has a moralistic attitude. In this country, for instance, what is termed morality is actually merely an expression of Puritanism. They are not the same at all. Puritanism is judgmentalism, which is devoid of compassion, love, or forgiveness. Its attitude is harsh, pitiless, and punitive. It appeals to egotism by feeling right, virtuous, and righteous. It operates by condemnation, shame, guilt, and fear, and seeks retribution and punishment. In contrast, consciousness itself is innately innocent. It becomes progressively programmed, often merely by accidental social influences. It is born into a specific subculture. At the lowest level, it finds itself among neighborhood gangs or peculiar secular cults with allegiances, symbols, secrets, initiations, and obedience to the group and its leaders. On this level of society, consequences for violation of group codes may result in death. There are group clothing styles, symbolic gestures, utterances, and tight group control. The members are brainwashed and intimidated. The chance to escape is slim. From one view, these behaviours are antisocial. From another, they are merely adaptational and dissocial. Although these attitudes are dissonant with society as a whole, they are internally consistent. The core of subcultures is programming. The content is spelled out in the lyrics of the music of the subculture. The norms of society are ridiculed and have no significance. On progressively higher social levels, the same type of programming takes place, but is less obvious or blatant. Again, group loyalties to social programs are expected. Variance is punished by subtle means or rejection. The consciousness of people on every level of society is entrained by a calibratable level of consciousness that prevails as a hidden attractor field. Attractor field is a term derived from nonlinear dynamics and signifies that within what appears to be random or unconnected occurrences, there is actually an invisible organizing pattern field of influence that affects the occurrence of phenomena within each level of consciousness. It also establishes parameters that limit understanding and awareness. If a concept is beyond the reach of understanding of a certain level of consciousness, people say, "I don't get it." When we look at the nature of consciousness, We could say that the mind is innately innocent, as it has no means to prevent its becoming programmed. It is an instrument that can be involuntarily imbued with any software. Unaided, human consciousness cannot discern truth from falsehood. The mind lacks a protective mechanism and is easily damaged. Emotions further decrease capacity for mature or balanced perception. In addition, the mind has an inherent defect in that it operates via perception itself, which automatically dissociates reality into duality and creates the spurious pseudo-reality of the seemingly polarity of the opposites. Consciousness is like the hardware of the computer, and social programming is like the software. No matter what the content of the software, the hardware remains uncontaminated and innately innocent. In the past, spiritual progress was limited by the dominance of religious authority and dogma, and was surrounded by fear and threats of persecution. Anyone who transcended the commonly held belief system, such as mystics, was suspected of heresy and was treated as though they were threats to the ecclesiastical establishment and its authority. This still prevails in some countries. In the Western world, this has changed, and it's continuing to change in a favourable direction. Cruelty is no longer accepted or condoned. The Holy See of the Catholic Church now speaks against capital punishment and has renewed its spiritual authority and power by the demonstration of humility and spiritual integrity. The fault was not within religion itself, but in the misinterpretations of it by those who did not truly understand its essence. Because ordinary human consciousness is blinded by the very nature of perception, it is completely unable to tell truth from falsehood. Because of its innate innocence, it can be misled, and all error is ignorance. The consciousness level that prevailed in mankind for the past centuries was actually inhospitable to spiritual truth, but now that the consciousness level is at 207, truth has found a fertile ground in which it is welcome and can grow. The will, understanding and comprehension. Will is determined by understanding and comprehension that, in turn, is influenced by meaning, which is then determined by context. Out of meaning and context arises value and, therefore, choice. The will energizes the efforts to achieve that which is valued by virtue of its meaning. To the worldly, motivation is based on wants and desires and the seduction of attraction. These wants and desires lose motivational force when they become overruled by will and decision. Will is thus the basis for spiritual growth and the evolution of consciousness. One becomes attracted by truth rather than repelled by falsehood. Spiritual evolution is almost like a spaceship taking off from Earth's gravity. It is difficult at first, but it finally leaves the gravitational field. Energy-consuming intentionality eventually dissolves into effortless surrender, and one becomes the recipient of unfolding awareness. Revelation replaces discovery. Understanding presents itself and becomes self-revealing by grace, without effort. The inner pressure to achieve spiritual awareness is replaced by being the witness of truth rather than its seeker. Effort is replaced by the effortlessness of spontaneous discovery. Essence progressively shines forth through form, which loses its delineation. Then even essence fades into the domain of the awareness of existence itself, with its self-revealing divinity. on the nature of peace. The profound peace prevails in the silence, which marks the ending of the experience of time. The illusion of time precludes peace, in that it occasions an expectation of a feeling of loss or anticipation. At ordinary levels of consciousness, this time pressure and its accompanying anxiety are outside awareness and go unnoticed, just as people who live next to elevated trains eventually become oblivious to the noise. But if the trains stop, they are overwhelmed by the sudden, strong silence. Some people who have become used to tumult and noise feel upset by silence and peace and seek to return to the familiarity of noise and disruption of people. Many people cannot tolerate the quiet of the country or an empty room. The silence of divinity, by contrast, is profoundly comforting and fulfilling. And there we are. That's the end of chapter 8. So we'll finish there. I hope you enjoyed that. I didn't make too many little mistakes along the way. And I wish you all the very best and hope to see you again. Bye for now. Much love.